When I was about 13, I stayed at my uncle's house over the summer. I didn't know it, but my parents were getting divorced and they wanted me to have a fun summer without dealing with the stress of moving. I loved my uncle's place, so I was thrilled to find out that I would get to stay there all summer. My uncle's house was not very pretty, a big old farmhouse with peeling yellow paint, but the farm was amazing. I was from the city, and my house barely had a yard, much less 20 acres of fields and forest, and a creek that ran through all of it. At first, my favourite thing to do was to simply run through those fields, as hard as I could, until I was so hot and exhausted, I thought I might pass out. Then jump into the cool waters of the forest-shaded creek. In the evening, my uncle would go out. He was divorced and preferred to spend a few hours across the country line at his favourite watering hole. Neither of us felt unsafe about me staying alone. It was a small community of neighbours, and there were quite a few loaded guns around the old farmhouse. As dusk fell on those long summer days, I would climb into my uncle's beat-up old recliner and watch his old TV until I fell asleep. Late one evening, I started having problems keeping the TV tuned to the right station. I crouched in front of it, slowly turning the fine-tuning ring. The TV was built into a huge wooden cabinet, but had a relatively small screen. This was long before the days of digital tuning, so picking up broadcasts from far away was often an exercise of patience and of amateur radio skills. I was desperate to see an old rerun of Lost in Space, so I kept fiddling with the tuning dials in the hopes of picking up audio, and more video than fuzzy, rolling outline. In a fit of frustration, I spun the knob far to the left and stomped off to the kitchen to make a sandwich. While I was making my sandwich, I heard a sound from the living room that made me pause. There is a sound that a person makes in a room, in the absence of absence, rather than any real noise. I spun around, butter knife clutched tightly in my hand. There was nothing there. I cautiously walked back into the living room where the TV sat, showing snow and hissing quietly. Nobody. Weird. I went back to the kitchen and finished my sandwich. As I opened the refrigerator for a can of soda, I heard another sound. Ah, it sighed. I was alone in the house, but I refused to be a chicken. I thought the TV must have finally started to pick up some channel. Oh yeah, I said, as I remembered. Old TVs, like my uncle's, can sometimes receive radio stations, or even shortwave. My uncle showed me that trick last year. Maybe that's what it is. I took my sandwich and cola back to the living room, and put them on top of the TV. As I reached for the tuning knob, I saw something on the screen. I blinked and moved back away from the screen. The white and black dots of electronic snow danced on the screen, accompanied by a low whispering hiss. I stared at the screen for a second, 2, 3. Nothing. I laughed. Now you're seeing stuff and talking to yourself. I looked away for a moment, and something caught my eye. I looked back at the screen. There, in the bright swirls of dots, was a shape. I don't know if the shape had been there all along, or if it had simply taken my mind a few moments to see it, like those dot pictures in the mall. I stared, eyes riveted to the screen, as an image resolved. In the static, I began to see the sweep of a brow, the slope of a nose, the curve of a mouth and chin. The screen rolled once, black bars slipping down, and the static faded away. I was looking at the face of a girl. Dark eyes, black hair, curly and cropped at the shoulders. Her face briefly filled the screen, and then grew smaller as she stepped away. I realized with a shock that I was looking at my uncle's living room, at my uncle's chair. I saw myself on the screen, and I saw the girl walking towards me. I looked around wildly, but there was nobody in the room. I looked back at the TV. She was standing right next to me. She looked directly at the screen. I watched on the TV as she took my hand. My hand began to burn with cold, and I saw her smile, the most terrifying smile. "I've been waiting for you," she said. I ran as fast as I could through the nearest doorway into my uncle's bedroom. I slammed the door and flipped on the lights, then jumped into his bed. I sat there, on his bed, watching the occasional headlights splash through the large windows until he came home. I tried to tell him what I saw, but he wouldn't listen to any of it. He was mostly drunk and just wanted to go to bed. The next morning, he had nearly convinced me it was just a dream, that perhaps I'd fallen asleep in his chair and had a nightmare. I went home the next weekend, to a house that I'd never seen before, and to a father who had moved to a different town. I mostly forgot about the thing I saw on my uncle's TV. I thought about it when I overheard my mother and my aunt talking in hushed tones about a terrible thing that happened at my uncle's place. A tenant family had died, in bad circumstance. I thought about it more recently when my mother told me the house had burned down after a car came off the curb and crashed into the side of the place. I think about that summer a lot now. We don't have analog TVs anymore, and I never listen to the radio, so I never hear static. But sometimes, in the white noise of a thunderstorm, or even the stillness of my own room at night, I hear her voice saying, "I'm still waiting."